Okay. All right. So kind of where we left off from the last class is, we were able to get a character into the environment, get it set up with character controller such that we could have the character move left to right, jump up and down. And what I'm going to do, just so I can make this easier to see, is I'm going to change the sprite of the character. So if I go press on sprite render, I press the little button there, I can look for different sprites. I'm going to bring back my sticky, and I need to rotate it so sticky is upright. And I just adjust the size of that so it fits the stick character. Just gotta make sure the ground check. Let's see, let's move the ground check. I'll move it so it's right underneath. So one thing, so definitely one of the things you need to be aware of is within the scripting, it does, the case does matter if you're trying to access different objects. So if I come back, so this is kind of an error that's come up. So character controller, that's the script that we've developed for having the character move around on the screen.
And this will fix the character from going through the floor.
Excellent.
Yeah. Cancel whatever.
And so at the start, it's trying to find an object that's tied to the game object where the script is, using this transform find and the name of it. And so because the name is capitalized with the G and the C, that has to match what's here. So so anyway, so kind of moving on, one of the other parts of this assignment is to get the camera to follow the character as you move around. So if I start the game right now, just to demonstrate, so if I move to the left and I move to the right, see the camera just kind of stays in one place. So if I decide to go off the screen, so I can't really see what I'm doing, I just have to jump for help so people can pay attention to me. So we want it where the camera's panning along with the player movement. So then as you're moving along, you can see that. And so I have a script that I've developed that you can add on to it. What I want to do is kind of write a short script, so then you can get some exposure to how you would create a script from scratch, and then you can either build upon that, or if you just want to use the one I provided, that's totally fine.
How to get moved?
It's not jumping for you?
No, it's jumping. I just can't get it to move left and right.
Do you have the code for it to go left and right? All right.
I didn't get that far.
So if you, when the videos are posted, you can follow along with that. So I want to kind of move on. I want to cover some of this stuff right now. So the way we can do this to get the camera following the character is we can modify the behavior of the camera such that now we can get it to follow the player or whatever that we want to follow. So if you remember, the camera is just another game object. But it has these different components associated with it. So it has this camera component. It has this flare layer, so if you want to do like lens flare, things like that, audio listener. This one, it has a missing script. So I believe at one time, when I set up the scene, I had a script that I was going to tie to it that's no longer there. But what we can do is we can utilize this, so we can fill in that script, so then we can modify the behavior of the camera. So what I can do, so I'm going to come into my scripts directory. I come to create. So when you click create, now you get a list of various various game objects that you can create by default. So you can create, a C# script. You can create a shader. You can create audio. When we move into animation, you can create an animation object or an animator controller. So how to change the different animations, physics materials, things like that. But right now, it's just going to be a C# script, and I will call this my camera follow. So when I create it, you can see on the right-hand side, it's creating a template for us to write our script. So let me open this up. So just kind of break down again how scripts are constructed in C# or how it kind of ties into the Unity engine. So C# is an object-oriented class, and so what object-oriented means is to have the definition of an object, and within that definition, you give it different variables. So you can think of those as kind of properties, and those can be exposed publicly, so that any other objects in your code can access it or modify it, or you can make them private, so then it can only be accessed and modified within the class. So we extend this other class called model behavior. By extending that, what we're doing is we're now able to bring in any of the functions and variables that have been defined within model behavior. And that's how Unity allows for the different components to be able to change the behavior of game objects. And so what's happening is that as we run the game, these different functions relate to different events that are happening within Unity. So for instance, start, what do y'all think start refers to?
Where you start the game.
Right, it's just when the level starts. So any game object that's in your scene that has a component or a script that has the start function, that'll get called, and then you can run whatever code that you put in there. Likewise with update, so because this is in the game engine, we're every frame of the game, we need to do some type of update to modify the game. And next week I'll go into game engines and kind of dive in this a little bit deeper, what it all really means. But really, so as the game's running, update's the function that you want to call to modify behavior for every frame that the game is being rendered or being run. And so this will end up being, and so for the code that we're going to write to get the camera to follow the player, this is what we're going to use.
I have the model behavior, but
Oh, this is a new class, a new script I just created.
oh,
And so just you come back and you right click, you say create, and then you create a C script, a C# script. That'll create a new script for you that then you can use.
so how do I access that? Oh, so I just don't click on it?
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
There you go. All right. So to kind of get this started, so what I want to do, so you've noticed in some of the other components, you can, or in the other scripts, you can reference other objects that exist in the scene. And so what I want to do is create a reference, be able to have a variable that says, I want to follow this object in the scene. So what I can do is I can say public, I'm going to call it transform. So I have to give it the type, the variable type. So a key difference between C# and say some other languages like JavaScript or Python, or other scripting languages you may have exposure to, is that C# is strongly typed. So that means you have to provide or you need to provide a data type for your variables. And then when it compiles, it checks to make sure that the data type that you provided, whatever value you're providing, it matches what that variable can support. And let's call it follow object. So if I come back, I'm going to come back to Unity. And if I come to the camera, so it's still compiling, where I have that missing script, I'm just going to put in my camera follow. And so you can see, well, for some in the back, it may be hard to see because it went to the bottom, but it opened up that, or it exposed that variable, this follow object. So now I have this value follow object that's out there, and now it's right now it's set to none because I haven't set any particular value. And just to show, if I come back here, so if I do private, so let's say private transform can't see me. And so because it's private, if I come back to Unity, so right now it's recompiling, so that variable does not get exposed because define it as a private variable. So anything you define as private cannot be used outside of the script that's being run, whereas anything that's public can be either accessed through the editor or other scripts that you have can call into it. So for this one, I was really just for demonstrative purposes, so I'm just going to remove that. Okay. So now what I want to do is within the update, I want to set the camera, or kind of set the value of the camera object. Or I'm sorry, I'm going to set the position of the camera. And so for every, and so what I need to do, so game object, so this game object, what this refers, so this refers to the object that the script is tied to. So if I say game, so game object, so if I call game object, it now starts giving me kind of different methods and different public variables and public methods that are all tied to a game object. And so if you remember, if I come back to Unity, that every game object has a transform associated with it. And so this transform is really just a data structure that holds these different variables, like position, rotation, and scale. And so in order to move our camera, what we're going to do is just directly modify the position of the game object where is the camera. And so if I come back to game object, I start typing transform, you can see it auto-completes transform. And then under transform, you remember that we had those three different variables, that position, rotation, and scale. And so position ends up being a variable. And then under position, we had X, Y, and Z. And you can see those values come up. So I now need to set that equal to something. So I'm going to set it to my follow object. And I want to set it to its position and its X value. So it's not happy about something. says cannot modify the return value. So maybe, oops. Or can I just directly modify transform? I should be able to do. Let's see. Oops. Always touch. Cannot modify the return value. Okay, so it's not happy about. Huh. So I thought it would just let me directly modify that, but it's not. This is getting set. Come on. Position. It's not variable. Weird. Let's see if I compile. Continue storing value in temporary variable. Okay, so it's giving me this error saying cannot modify value, return value, this transform. Consider storing the value in temporary one. Okay, so it's not happy about this. Then what we can do is we can just have the set function. And so set allows us to call or set different values. So I can say set. I can say set position y. And then for the z value, I can just use the current z value for the game objects. I was a little bit happier about that. So, and then with regards to spacing, when you get into coding, spacing, there's some languages where spacing ends up being the way that you define each line in code. In C#, it's defined by each line that ends with a semicolon. So I said you can have it where you can have it as one line. You can have it broken up like I have. If you just want to get really crazy, you can just put all sorts of weird white space in here, and it's still going to read it fine. So I'm just going to go back and put this so it looks a little bit more sane. And so the nice part about using something like Visual Studio or ModelDevelop is that if you're writing code and it doesn't jive with what is allowed, so in this case, it wasn't happy I was trying to directly modify that x and y and z value for the game object, but it does offer this set function that lets us go in and do that.
Follow object, there's nothing. The name follow object does not exist in current context.
So you need to make sure that at the top you define a variable called follow object.
And there's supposed to be something like this up here. Yeah, I have it up here. Ooh, put A's. Ooh.
Okay. So it compiles. If it's happy, so now my error, if you didn't notice, my error went away
There we go.
from previously. So now what I need is I actually need to set the follow object to some value to follow. So I'm going to set it to my main character.
Follow object, I have the follow camera, but
Do you have a public variable like this?
public. Yeah.
And did you save the script file before? So make sure you save the script in the editor. So one thing you need to be cognizant of, if you make any changes, so say for instance, I have follow object, and I want to change it to the name to follow this object. And so the nice part about the Visual Studio is that it's giving me errors, so I can immediately do that. But if I come back to Unity, because I haven't saved the file, it's not compiling. It keeps the same value. It's not until I save it that's when Unity will start compiling it. And now I changed it to follow this object. So that's one thing so as you're modifying scripts and you're ready to try stuff out in Unity, make sure you save in the editor before you bring up Unity.
Okay, so where do we need to save up here? Save assets? Or
Just if you do, just Control S or just save file. Okay, so I have Woody now set as the object I want to follow. And I press play. And now so it's not quite working the way I hoped.
the things are too. Yeah, the setting too small.
Well, the camera's not moving the way that I was expecting it to move. So let me go back. So I may have to say this game object. So let's try.
I don't have that follow this object underneath the script.
Okay, let me.
You go through that
Hmm.
one.
Okay. It's not quite working the way I hoped. So let's see. So what could be the issue here? I'm going to remove that because that didn't really make much of a difference. I don't want to confuse y'all too much. So another thing you can check too. So if we're trying to debug kind of what's happening, so if you see on the right hand side, you can have the inspector running. And so if I click on Woody and I start, I'll have it highlighted. So as I start moving to the left and right, you can see the values changing up here. So you can see, the X value changing. So what I should be expecting is that if I click on the main camera, I would see something similar, but I don't. Okay. So, not quite sure why that's not working, but the nice part is I have provided another script that I know should work. So, if you come down here to camera follow and you add the camera follow script in, so what I can do is I can delete or disable the one I had. So now I have this camera follow script. If I bring in, it's asking for a target, and so I can bring in, my character as a target. And then you can see the camera starting to move around the way that we would expect. So Not quite sure why what I had wasn't
Value's too low.
wasn't working, but like I said, the expectation for this assignment is just to use the camera follow I provided for you already. And with this camera, it's using some different functionality to be able to change how far you can look ahead. You can dampen how fast the camera pans back and forth to the character. So if I lower, say, the dampening value, and I come back, now the camera snaps quickly to the player.
There you go.
Likewise, if I increase the value of the dampening, it takes a while for the camera to finally pan and update to where the character's at. So you can play around with some of these values to kind of get a sense of what works for the aesthetic or what you want to do for your game. Yes?
So is it always horizontal and not vertical?
No, it also works in the vertical too. So if I come back, so my character's not, if I change how, because that was the problem we were running into a while ago, was that the player would jump too high and you couldn't follow. Now it's following everywhere you go. So yeah, so now you also have the ability to change your character, so the speed of the character, so you can see him move around, how that would work. Let me add it. So real quick, let's do the parallax. So there's, oops, let me save that. So kind of the last part about the assignment that needs to be covered is the parallax. And so parallax is this effect where you can have objects that move at different speeds to give that sensation of depth. So for instance, if you're driving along the road, the objects that are closer to you, so other cars or signs you're passing by kind of whiz by real fast, whereas the Sandia Mountains look like they stay fairly static. Yeah.
Relatively static.
And so the way that you can achieve that effect in 2D is that you can just have, as you're moving along, you just move objects at different rates. And so, for the parallax, you can modify. In this case, we'll just tie it to the camera. And here it's gonna ask you kind of what's the background, what's the midground. So for those of you who've been changing these scenes, you don't necessarily need to have a background and a midground. You can just pick. You can still have one or the other. It's just one of the when it tries to update these, if there's nothing set, it's not going to move anything. For those who've kind of kept this background, midground, foreground, what you can do is if you grab the parent object, so background and midground, so that's going to move all of the objects in the that are within background and midground. Yes.
If we have more than one or more than two layers in the back, how would we add new layers?
Okay.
Or is that
Yeah, so you can add more. If you were to come into the parallax script, so in the parallax scripts, we have a background and a midground. So you would just add one more. So I could say public high ground. How about that? And so the other thing you would need to do is you need to have some scaling value for each one that you want to move. And so I'll just call this. Okay. Okay, thank you. And so with an update, what we're doing in the update is we're figuring out how far we've moved since the last update. So it's just looking to see how far the camera's moved from the last update to now. And so it figures out that difference, and then it scales how far to move the other objects based upon how much the camera's moved. And so, we do background, midground, and if we wanted to add, say, our high ground, we do high ground, position, and plus equal means add this value to this particular variable, and we're going to scale our move by the high ground parallax scale. So I save that, and I come back to Unity, and so it builds, or it should be compiling. So now I have this high ground. And so even though I don't use high ground, like I don't have it set, we'll see if it,
Whoa.
look at that. Okay. So it could be a little problematic.
Yeah. Well, that was cool. Do it again.
So if you comment that out.
Do it again.
So I compile it. Okay. So it's a little bit happier now. So I was lying. So if you don't use, if for some reason you're missing one of these values, so if you only have one layer you want to move, then you need to come into the script and you can either just remove all the references to the midground, or if you, and so this means comment. And so comment means it's not going to read that line of code. So it's not going to try, and so what was happening was because I didn't have this set, or I didn't have high ground set to anything, it was trying to add a value to a variable that was null. And so I was giving that weird effect you were seeing.
Oh, but it was cool though.
But, so that should get, like I said, so that should get you covered for most of the assignment. The only thing that would be left would be to look at how to do double jump or for the run. And we can talk a little bit about how to do that next Tuesday. So I'm going to stop here.